What if I told you that during World War II, there existed a concentration camp so brutal that even Nazi officials demanded its operations be toned down? A place where Croatian fascists developed killing methods so savage that German inspectors filed formal complaints. Where children were systematically murdered with hammers, and guards competed to see who could kill the most prisoners in a single night. This isn't hyperbole. Between 1941 and 1945, in the forests of Croatia, a complex of camps operated that would become known as the Auschwitz of the Balkans. Here, the Croatian Ustaše regime murdered an estimated 83,000 to 100,000 men, women, and children, Serbs, Jews, Roma, and Croatian political prisoners. Unlike the industrial killing machines of Nazi Germany, Jasenovac relied on medieval brutality: knives, hammers, axes, and a specially designed curved blade called the Srbosjek, literally meaning Serb cutter. This is the story of Jasenovac, Europe's forgotten death camp, where fascist ideology merged with ancient ethnic hatred to create one of history's most horrific chapters. The story begins with the collapse of Yugoslavia in April 1941. When Hitler's forces invaded, they didn't just conquer territory, they unleashed decades of suppressed ethnic tensions. Within days of the German victory, Croatian fascist leader Ante Pavelić proclaimed the independent state of Croatia, known as the NDH. Pavelić's Ustaše movement had spent years in exile, funded by Mussolini and inspired by Nazi racial theories. But unlike their German allies, the Ustaše added a uniquely Balkan twist to fascist ideology. Their plan for Croatia was simple. 1/3 of Serbs would be killed, 1/3 expelled, and 1/3 forcibly converted to Catholicism. Jews and Roma would be eliminated entirely. The speed of implementation was breathtaking. Within weeks of taking power, the Ustaše published racial laws that stripped Serbs, Jews, and Roma of basic rights. Mixed marriages were banned. Serbian Cyrillic script was outlawed. Orthodox churches were destroyed or converted to Catholic ones. But legal persecution was just the beginning. Even before Jasenovac was built, mass killings had begun across the NDH. In villages throughout Bosnia and Croatia, Ustaše militias rounded up Serbian families and executed them en masse. The methods were deliberately primitive and public. Throats cut with knives, victims thrown into pits, entire families burned alive in their homes. The first organized killing site was Gospić, where in May 1941, hundreds of Serbian civilians were murdered and thrown into nearby caves. Then came Jadovno, a camp established in a remote mountainous region where an estimated 10,000 to 40,000 people were killed in just 3 months of operation. But these early sites had problems. They were too visible, too disorganized. Bodies were washing up in rivers, and the stench of death was attracting unwanted attention. The Ustaše needed something more systematic, more hidden. They needed Jasenovac. In August 1941, construction began on what would become the Jasenovac camp complex. Located in a bend of the Sava River, about 100 kilometers southeast of Zagreb, the site was chosen for its isolation and natural barriers. The river formed a natural boundary, while dense forest provided cover from prying eyes. Jasenovac wasn't a single camp, but a complex of 5 main sites spread across 149 square miles. Camp 1 was for men, Camp 2 for women and children. Camp 3 served as the main extermination center. Camp 4 was a leather and brick factory using slave labor, and Camp 5 held children and served as a collection point for victims. The camp's first commandant was Ljubo Miloš, a former police officer who established the basic operational procedures. But it was his successor, Vjekoslav Max Ljuburić, who transformed Jasenovac into a killing machine that would shock even hardened Nazi officials. Unlike German concentration camps with their gas chambers and industrial efficiency, Jasenovac relied on manual killing methods that maximized suffering. The Ustase developed their own tools of murder, most notably the Srbosjek, a curved blade attached to a leather glove that allowed guards to cut throats with a simple hand motion. The camp's layout was designed for terror. New arrivals were processed through a reception area where they were stripped, beaten, and sorted. Those selected for immediate death were marched to killing sites along the Sava River. Others were sent to barracks where they faced slow death through starvation, disease, and random violence. The barracks themselves were instruments of torture, overcrowded, unheated, and infested with vermin. They housed up to 500 people in spaces designed for 50. Prisoners slept on bare floors, often in their own waste. Food consisted of thin soup and moldy bread, barely enough to sustain life. What made Jasenovac particularly horrific was the sadistic creativity of its guards. Unlike German camps where killing was often mechanized and impersonal, Jasenovac's guards took personal pleasure in inflicting maximum pain and humiliation. Petar Brzica, a guard who became infamous for his killing prowess, won a contest by murdering 1,360 prisoners in a single night using only a knife. He was rewarded with a gold watch, a silver service, and a roasted pig. Other guards competed to see who could devise the most creative methods of torture. Children were particular targets of cruelty. At the Sisak Children's Camp, a sub-camp of Jasenovac, guards would select children each morning and beat them to death with hammers. Pregnant women were cut open and their fetuses removed. Prisoners were forced to sing Ustaše songs while being tortured. The psychological torture was as systematic as the physical. Guards would force prisoners to dig their own graves, then make them wait days or weeks before the execution. Families were murdered in front of each other, with children forced to watch their parents die. While Serbs made up the majority of Jasenovac's victims, the camp's horror touched every targeted group. Croatian Jews, who had lived peacefully in the region for centuries, found themselves facing the same fate as their co-religionists across Nazi-occupied Europe. The Roma people, already marginalized in Yugoslav society, were among the first to be targeted. Entire Roma settlements were liquidated, with survivors sent to Jasenovac, where they faced particular brutality due to racist stereotypes about their supposed criminal nature. Perhaps most tragically, thousands of Croatian political prisoners, communists, socialists, and anyone who opposed the Ustaše regime were also murdered at Jasenovac. These were people who shared ethnicity and often religion with their killers, but whose political beliefs marked them for death. What makes Jasenovac unique in Holocaust history is that it actually disturbed Nazi officials. German military commanders and SS officers stationed in Croatia filed numerous complaints about Ustaše methods, not out of humanitarian concern, but because the public nature of the killings was causing instability and partisan recruitment. General Edmund Glaise von Horstenau, the German plenipotentiary in Croatia, wrote to Berlin describing Ustaše methods as bestial and counterproductive. SS Oberfuhrer Hermann Behrens complained that Croatian killing methods were primitive and inefficient. The Germans weren't concerned about the killing itself. They were conducting their own genocide across Europe. What bothered them was the Ustaše's preference for public, brutal methods that created martyrs and fueled resistance. They preferred the clinical efficiency of gas chambers to the medieval savagery of throat-cutting. Despite the horror, resistance existed within Jasenovac. Prisoners organized secret networks to share food, information, and hope. Some managed to maintain religious practices in secret, while others planned escapes. The most successful escape occurred on April 22, 1945, when about 600 prisoners overwhelmed their guards and fled into the surrounding forests. Most were recaptured and killed, but some survivors lived to tell their stories. Their testimonies would become crucial evidence of the camp's atrocities. Communist partisans also conducted raids on the camp complex, though their primary goal was military rather than humanitarian. These attacks forced the Ustase to divert resources to camp security, and occasionally allowed small numbers of prisoners to escape. As Tito's partisans closed in on Zagreb in April 1945, the Ustase began destroying evidence of their crimes. Prisoners were murdered en masse, buildings were demolished, and documents were burned. The last group of prisoners was killed just days before liberation. When partisan forces finally reached Jasenovac on May 2, 1945, they found a largely empty complex with clear signs of hasty destruction. Bodies were still being pulled from the Sava River months later. Unlike Nazi war criminals who faced justice at Nuremberg, most Ustase leaders escaped punishment. Ante Pavelić fled to Argentina, then Spain, where he lived comfortably until his death in 1959. Many camp guards and officials found refuge in South America, or blended back into Croatian society. For decades after the war, the full truth about Jasenovac remained hidden. Tito's Yugoslavia, built on the principle of brotherhood and unity among ethnic groups, suppressed detailed discussion of wartime atrocities to prevent renewed ethnic tensions. Official Yugoslav historiography acknowledged that crimes occurred, but downplayed their scale and brutality. The focus was on partisan heroism and socialist reconstruction, not on examining the depths of fascist depravity. This silence allowed myths and denials to flourish. Some Croatian nationalists claimed the camp was merely a work camp, where deaths resulted from disease and poor conditions, not systematic murder. Others argued that victim numbers were exaggerated for political purposes. It wasn't until the 1980s, as Yugoslavia began to fracture, that serious scholarly research into Jasenovac began. Historians gained access to previously classified documents and survivor testimonies, revealing the full scope of the camp's horrors. Today, the Jasenovac Memorial Site preserves the memory of the victims and educates visitors about the dangers of ethnic hatred and fascist ideology. But the camp remains a source of political controversy, with some Croatian politicians and intellectuals continuing to minimize its significance. The exact number of victims remains disputed, with estimates ranging from 83,000 to over 100,000. What isn't disputed is the systematic nature of the killing and the particular brutality of the methods used. Jasenovac stands as a reminder that genocide doesn't require advanced technology or industrial infrastructure. It requires only hatred, organization, and the willingness of ordinary people to participate in extraordinary evil. The camp's history also demonstrates how quickly civilized society can collapse when ethnic and religious differences are weaponized by extremist movements. The Ustase didn't emerge from nowhere. They built on centuries of ethnic tensions and religious divisions. Perhaps most importantly, Jasenovac shows us the importance of remembering and confronting difficult histories. The decades of silence that followed the camp's liberation allowed myths and denials to take root, making reconciliation more difficult. Today, as ethnic nationalism and authoritarianism rise again across Europe and beyond, the lessons of Jasenovac remain painfully relevant. The camp stands as a warning of what happens when hatred triumphs over humanity, and why we must never forget the victims of fascist brutality. The ghosts of Jasenovac demand that we remember, not just the numbers, but the individual faces, the personal stories, the human cost of ideological extremism. Only by confronting this dark history can we hope to prevent its repetition. If you found this information valuable and believe these forgotten stories of World War II need to be told, please subscribe to World War IIpedia and hit the notification bell. Share this video to help spread awareness of Jasenovac and other untold chapters of history. What other lesser-known World War II atrocities do you think deserve more attention? Let me know in the comments below. These events happened, They were covered up or forgotten, and they deserve to be known. Remember, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it.